So our three speakers today are, first, we have Dr. Susan Pudin, who is currently the head of planning at the Environment Protection Department, Sabah. Dr. Susan Pudin, I've known Dr. Susan for a long, long time. Her forte is environmental education, and she is instrumental in developing the environmental education policy for the state of Sabah. She's very active in the Sabah EE network, and someone who's very passionate about environment. So Susan's expertise is on environmental education, and today she will share some of her thoughts about climate change and education and awareness. Right? Our second speaker is town planner for Nurliza Hashim, who's currently the managing director of AJM Planning and Urban Design Group, which is one of Malaysia's most prominent town planning firms. She's also the CEO of Urbanization Malaysia, a very active town planner, formerly the president of Malaysian Institute of Planners. And Nurliza is very passionate about cities and cities planning, and she's been quite vocal on planning of resilient cities that are resilient to climate change, cities that are resilient to disasters, resilient to everything. So for Nurliza is one of the most experienced town planners in the country. So we are pleased to have her here today to share her views. And our third speaker today is Encik Efendi Noor Azmi, who's a consultant at ERE Consulting Group. Efendi's expertise is in biodiversity and natural resources. So he has done a lot of work on climate adaptation, on natural resources planning, biodiversity conservation, and he has been involved in quite a number of projects throughout the country. So today, he's going to share with us some of the sciences, particularly those relating to ecosystem, natural resources, and their relationship with climate change, and how do we adapt to them. And of course, I am Bala, the Managing Director of ERE Consulting Group, and I'll be a moderator this morning. To start off our forum, let me just share with you a few slides, just a few. I don't want to take the shine off the speakers. But before I go on, please, once again, keep your microphones and camera off. Ladies and gentlemen, as you all know, the world is changing. Our population is increasing rapidly, the demographics are changing, climate change is upon us, and it affects the way we live and work, and technology is changing very fast. And all these three, population, climate change, and technology, are to me the key drivers of how the world is changing. And these are the key drivers how the world will look like in the decades to come. Let me just start off with just giving you some data on how climate change is affecting us. So these are data based on good work done by NARIN and also people at IPCC. From a temperature point of view, you'll expect increase in temperature as much as 1.6 degrees C up to 2050. And this change is not uniform. In some parts of the country, the changes will be greater than the others. We expect rainfall to change. It could increase and it could decrease. And in this case here, we expect Peninsular Malaysia to undergo a much greater change compared to Sabah and Sarawak. And of course, we have sea level rise, which is again very different from place to place. Anything from 0.2 meters to 0.6 meters variation throughout the country. In addition to this, of course, we'll experience acidification of our oceans. And all these changes will, of course, have their own impacts, from dry spells to heat waves to increased flood to coral bleach and so on. So some of the speakers will touch on this. And with this and climate change affects many different sectors. Climate change affects our water resources. We could have dry spells, we could have more floods. It affects our agriculture. Shortage of water leads to reduced yields. Higher temperature could change the crop patterns. It affects our biodiversity and ecosystems. Many animals migrate as a result of temperature and rainfall changes. It affects our public health and well-being. Some diseases are more prone during the wetter season. Some vector-based diseases are increasing. Our infrastructure is also affected. Many of our infrastructure in the coastal areas are now very vulnerable to sea level rise. Our cities and settlements are also affected. And as you know, most of our people live in cities and urban areas, so climate change affects a lot of us. And also the way we manage disasters will also change. Changes in rainfall pattern not only affects our water supply, it also affects our crops. Crop yields could decline and affecting food security. Many of our critical infrastructure are in the coastal areas. I think 19 out of our 21 major power stations are located right next to the sea. Many of our airports are right next to the sea, and all these are actually quite vulnerable to sea level rise and other events triggered by climate change. Our cities, I think our cities is where now about 75% of Malaysia's population live. How we plan cities is also dictated by how climate change will affect. When it comes to disaster relief, I just put a picture here showing a hospital flooded. And of course, when there's a disaster flood, the last place you want flooded is the hospital, right? How would we plan differently in the years to come? And all these are, of course, compounded by the fact that our population is increasing. By 2050, we expect Malaysia's population to hit 46 million. That is about 12 or 13 million more people compared to today. We also expect more people to be living in the cities. The current rate of urbanization in Malaysia is about 76%, and we expect this to go up to 87% in 2050. So we have much bigger cities and more people living in cities, right? So all this have implication on how we adapt to climate change. So, ladies and gentlemen, with that quick opening, I'm now going to put the spotlight on the speakers. There's a slight change in speaking sequence. I'm going to ask Encik Efendi to speak first because he's going to speak a lot more about the sciences and the impact of climate change. So I thought that will set the scene very well for everyone. So with that, let me stop these slides and call upon Encik Efendi to share with us his view. And Efendi, before you share your views, maybe you can share a little bit about what you do on your daily work, and then tell us about what do you think are the key challenges to our society as a result of climate change over the next 2 or 3 decades. As I said, we are rapidly globalizing, the economy is changing, the population is growing. What do you think are the key challenges that we will face in the coming decades? Go ahead, Fendi.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Otabala. Let me just share some slides. So can you see this?
Yes.
Yeah. First of all, thanks to everyone who's here today in this forum. So my name is Fendi. So I've been a consultant for ERE for the past 5 to 6 years. So basically in ERE, I've been involved in quite a few projects, mostly related to biodiversity and climate change policies at national level and state level as well. So I've been doing some projects related to climate change. So today I just want to share with you what is the current scenario of climate change in Malaysia, what are the challenges that we're going to face in a few decades to come. I think some of the talking points already covered by Dr. Bala before, but I'm just going to dive in deeper. So I would like to start with where we are now globally, because I think it's really important to look at this perspective. Just for refreshment, the Paris Agreement actually aimed to limit global temperature rise by 2 Celsius by end of this century and strive to reduce it to 1.5 Celsius. But for all the talk about climate mitigation and decarbonization, we are not doing as fast as we could. And simply countries' commitment under the Paris Agreement is not strong enough. So even if they meet all the commitments under the NDCs, the world is pretty much heading for 3.2 degrees Celsius global temperature rise. That could really create wider ranging and more disruptive climate impacts, because scientists already said that we need to limit warming below 2 Celsius to even have a chance to adapt to climate change. So how well can we adapt to climate change? It really depends on mitigation level and how we limit the global temperature. So if without any intervention, we could head to 4 degrees Celsius by 2000. So that's, by that time, probably adaptation is not even possible anymore, because we are looking, society might even looking to outlive the impact. So just bear in mind where we're heading. And to make things worse, some developed countries are already trying to pull out of Paris Agreement. So yeah, just keep that in mind. So Dr. Bala already touched some of these impacts in Malaysia. So of course, I just going to glance through it. In Malaysia, we can expect more warmer climate and high temperature, especially in northern region of Peninsular Malaysia. Annual rainfall is going to increase for the whole region, except for West Coast Sabah, where they may be declined by -4%. So sea level rise likely will increase by minimum of 0.1 meter in all region, except for especially for West Coast of Peninsular Malaysia and Sabah and Sarawak. So I'm just going to show you what sea level rise implication on some of these vulnerable low-lying region of Malaysia. As I said before, the West Coast is more vulnerable because of the low-lying nature of the area. Navin probably have a better inundation map than this, but this image actually provides a decent snapshot. So as you can see, the difference, global temperature increase of 1.5 Celsius compared to 3 Celsius is actually massive. You can see that area like at Teluk Intan and Portland will, some of this area completely being submerged. And if you look at Jitwa and Kedah, this is very interesting, because you can look at 3 Celsius warming scenario, practically the whole Granary area will be affected. That would really affect our food security. So I'm just going to touch on some implication on some key sectors and how climate change really going to hinder our pathway towards sustainable development. So the typical pattern of climate change is that we're going to have same amount of annual rainfall or higher in 1 year. But the thing is, it's going to happen in a shorter duration with higher density. So we have like a rainfall bomb that happens in a very shorter time, but we have a longer dry spell. So we can expect that we have higher magnitude of flood, but we have longest spell of drought, and that will affect our water supply. So that's really going to change how we manage our water resources in the future, because right now we depend about 97% of our water supply come from river. So that might not happen in our river flow might be affected, and our dam level will be reduced during drought season. So that's one implication. And another one that I think deserves more attention is our food system and agriculture, because climate change is definitely going to threaten our food security in terms of our reduced yield and agricultural output and livestock production because of the sensitivity towards temperature. And for example, if you read the news recently, even every year, you can already see that farmers in northern region of Kedah and some areas already face issues in yield reduction, especially due to drought and saline intrusion. And speaking of globalization and food system, the food system that we have right now, it relies on a supply chain in globally. So if you think about it, most of the food that came on your plate relies on production, processing, and transportation in various links throughout the world to even reach out to your plate. So this food system carries a lot of jobs and momentum, and is exposed to various level of vulnerability and risk in other areas of the world. For example, even though we have reached self-sufficiency level of chicken and poultry by 100%, actually we rely on import of corns from other countries, especially Argentina and Brazil. So imagine if there's a climate risk happening in that area, that could severely affected our output in this country as well. Not to mention the food system is also threatened by protectionism policies from another country. So next up is cities and settlements. As what Dr. Bala said, we have 75% of our people living in the cities, and that amount might be increased by 80% by 2050. So typical effect of climate change on cities will be we have higher urban heat island effect, heat wave, more flash floods, and increasing frequency and intensity of storm events. And this is already happening right now. If I want to share with you, a few days ago in Shah Alam, where I stay, you already see a few trees drop on the car in some areas, and it caused quite a chaos in this area. So of course, all this is really going to affect our well-being in terms of loss of livelihood from extreme weather event and mental stress that comes with urban heat island and so forth. So we definitely going to see more diseases that influence closely with warmer temperatures, such as dengue or malaria, and also comes with malnutrition associated with shorter food supply. So before that, and also just imagine if there's a massive influx of climate refugees from other countries into Malaysia. This could create more social unrest and cultural conflicts between the immigrants and Malaysians. Case in point, I already want to say this now that you're already seeing it with the current situation with Rohingya refugees currently right now in the country. So before that, it's really important to note that even though climate change affects everyone, there are populations that disproportionately exposed to the risk, and the impact is often felt by the vulnerable and marginalized groups, such as smallholder farmers who dependent on agriculture and coastal areas, and indigenous community who rely on natural resources, and also especially group that's still in poverty. So they actually have very little means of cushion to cope with climate change impacts in terms of lacking access to capital and no insurance coverage, to name a few. So among the challenges of climate change in the future is how do we really improve adaptive capacity of these vulnerable groups? Because in my opinion, how do we protect our vulnerable group is really what defines us as a society. And the current pandemic of the COVID-19 is already showcasing how our vulnerable groups are affected the most by our skewed economic system and capitalism. So this likely going to widen the inequality gap and possibly increase our poverty level. So just on a touch again, as again we said, some of the keys are such as at risk, and these are foundation of our economy. For example, we have loss of power station at coastal area and high risk, which will potentially be affected by sea level rise and storm surges. Based on a preliminary assessment by, I think by highlighted in the third national communication to NFCCC, out of 21 power stations in Malaysia, 19 could potentially be affected by sea level rise. And during disaster as well, we have seen some hospitals in Penang and Kelantan also get flooded during flood. So my last point is actually to show that the challenges that we face right now in Malaysia in terms of climate change, it comes from potential shift in climate hazards. So we have to look at how they interact with human-created vulnerability and exposure interacted with the climate hazards. For example, we can only tackle climate hazards based on our mitigation actions that require global effort. So that's very difficult. Already you can see that we are not decarbonizing as fast as we could. But at the same time, we can also change the risk by controlling how we expose to climate change and also our vulnerability. Exposure, of course, is how Dr. Bala shows some of that population going to increase in the future. We will have more urban areas. We were going to have more infrastructure. So automatically, when you have that, you will have more exposure to climate risk. And vulnerability can be as simple as a poor drainage system in an area or longkang tersumbat or whatever, to fragmented water governance that could actually enhance the impacts. So let me show some of the examples. Like for example, let's say we look at flood. Often that we have increased magnitude of flooding, but sometimes flood happens not because of climate change, because this is usually what scientists and whatever stakeholders I talk to, it's very hard to pinpoint an event to climate change because there are various factors interacting with it. So the climate hazards could be, we have heavy rainfall events and shifting in pattern of rainfall. But at the same time, we also have some of the vulnerability factors that include more urbanization and non-permeable surface. We have deforestation in water catchment area. And basically, we have very poor waste management, which will lead to more ineffective drainage system. And of course, when these three factors interacted with what we have, natural capital and economic activities, you can have more increased flooding. So we might not be able to control our hazards in the future, but to manage our challenges, we need to start controlling our vulnerability and exposure. And another example is urban heat island, very common in urban areas. So increased temperature is a hazard, but at the same time, cities right now, you can see that we have more hard infrastructure. Every building right now trying to color their building black and gray. They actually will retain the heat more in urban areas. And we have more clearance of green spaces and urban forests. And also we are not shifting to public transport as much as it should. So this actually increase the impact of urban heat island even more. So my point is, in the future, the challenges we face, to highlight what Dr. Bala asked us now about we in the coming society, my opinion is that it's going to relate to how much we manage these three factors. It's not easy to manage the hazards, but we can look tackle our vulnerability and exposure. Yeah. So that's so far my 2 cents for this moment.
Okay, Efendi, thank you very much. I think you can stop sharing your slides.
Yeah, let me, how do I do this? Okay, right, stop.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned many points.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, besides impact on humans, obviously climate change has impacts on biodiversity and ecosystems,
Yes.
and plants and animals. Would you like to share your thoughts on that?
Okay, yeah. Just a very tricky question. So the question is, what kind of adaptation effort should we doing to preserve our biodiversity? And I think, for my opinion, I think one of the biggest constraint in relation between biodiversity and climate change is so far is about limited observation and how climate change can affect them, especially when you talk about species specific. We have some studies that have been done so far. We know that species as a moth in Mount Kinabalu that is moving uphill. We know that population in coastal area, the population are affected by temperature increase. In terms of now, we have more female than male. But generally, the impacts of climate change on migratory patterns of mammals, reptiles, and amphibians and birds are still very difficult to establish. I think maybe some of the biodiversity experts in the chat group can correct me on this. But that's what I think, especially when it's not easy to establish the trend, because their migratory patterns also interact with other non-climatic factors, such as deforestation, habitat fragmentation, and so forth. But in my opinion, time is really running out. So to be able to do research and to carry out extensive research impacts of climate change on biodiversity is going to take a long time, and it's going to be quite expensive. So we cannot wait till we have all the data to start something. So I think we certainly know that temperature change can cause shifts in latitude or longitude, where species need to migrate to keep up with their optimal habitats and so forth. So what we can do just now, as I said, we need to reduce our vulnerability. So the best is to give all our animals the best chance to survive. And one of the adaptation efforts has been highlighted in even in reporting to UNFCCC, is we can have a win-win situation with conservation goals, is to enhance ecological connectivity. So this includes connecting fragmented habitats across the landscape and creating more wildlife refugia along the way. So this is really one of the quite an effective way. Sorry. So since Malaysia already have a Center Forest Fund initiative and Heart of Borneo in place, this actually gives us a head start. Of course, there are questions with implementation in place, and there are some challenges, but at least it gives us the head start. So another way to look at ecosystem and biodiversity related to climate change is to restore degraded natural habitats, which is often vulnerable to climate change, such as mangrove and peat swamps. So restoring them is actually one of the best ways to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And this is already being written in the National Biodiversity Policy and National RDD Plus strategy, where it calls for mapping of all these vulnerable ecosystems and start to prioritizing which is the area you want to rehabilitate. But so far, I think we have not done as much as we should. So my point is, when you rehabilitate, it's not just it's actually rehabilitating, not degazetting a peat swamp forest just because it's always burned to forest fire and develop them. So that's not the way. So yeah, that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you, Fendi. There are several questions for you in the chat group. Maybe you can have a look at it. There's a question by Mr. Ng. There's a question by Dato' Noor Hisham. There's a question by Casey Lee, and so on. I'm going to move to the second speaker, so it gives you some time to look at those questions. Then we'll come back to you later. Okay, for the next session, next speaker, I'm going to call upon Dr. Susan Pudin from the Environment Protection Department, Sabah. Again, as I mentioned to you earlier, Susan's forte is education and awareness. So, Dr. Susan, before
Thank you very
you
much.
before you go ahead, maybe you want to share very quickly the work that you do at EPD now, and then share your thoughts on what you think are the greatest challenges in the coming decades with respect to climate change.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bala. Before that, let me just upload the presentation here. Can everyone see this?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, very good morning again, everyone. This is day 41 of our MCO. I keep tab of the days, and I hope everyone is keeping well and keeping safe at home. So I've been working with EPD. This is my 20th year, and I've actually learned so much in the department. And now, currently, I'm in the planning sector, of which environmental education is part of it, as well as environmental studies and also monitoring, environmental monitoring and information system. So for the next 10 minutes, Dr. Bala said I only have about 10 minutes. So I will be giving
Yeah, Susan, just a quick
yeah.
interruption. Is
Yeah.
it possible for you to increase your volume? Apparently, many people can't hear you.
Oh, okay, sure. Let me see. I think I have. Hold on. Can you hear now better, Dr. Bala?
Better now. And can also your slides be in the presentation mode
Yeah, it is in presentation mode now.
already?
Yeah, can you see that? Or
It still look like the non-presentation mode. I mean, we can see your slides, but they are not on the full screen.
is
Can you,
the voice clearer? Is the sound better?
sound is better.
Okay.
The slides, maybe you can click on your slideshow.
Yeah, I've clicked that, Dr. Bala.
Is it
I don't know
okay?
what
Go ahead
happened.
then. Go ahead.
Sorry about that. Okay, so I'll be giving just a brief introduction and what EPD does to address climate change issues and the key challenges as mentioned by Dr. Bala earlier. So before we proceed, let's establish the fact that climate change is everyone's business. It is not the sole responsibility of Vi, who is working for an environment department, nor it is the sole responsibility of Mr. B, who runs an NGO, or even Madam Jen, who's running a school, or Miss Opie, who is looking after 3 oil palm mills on the East Coast. All of us have a role to play, and we are also part of the solution. Closer to home, climate change is highlighted in the Sabah State Policy on the Environment. This policy was launched in 2017, and there are 5 key areas in the policy, highlighted in the policy: land, air, water, biodiversity, and social dimension. It's such a massive policy, but how do we even attempt to translate this into action? Last year, the Sabah State Cabinet approved the action plans for the Sabah State Policy on the Environment. It is a massive document. It has 195 action plans for all the key areas I mentioned earlier. And it's something huge, but we just have to do it. Because for us, we have to do something. We have to move forward in safeguarding our environment, including taking climate actions. So EPD is coordinating the implementation of these action plans, of which we coordinate with various and government departments, agencies that were given the mandate to lead each action plan. So the work has started end of last year. So fingers crossed for this. Dr. Bala also mentioned earlier that we have the Sabah Environmental Education Policy that was actually published quite a while ago, 2009. It's quite a long time. But the policy is still very much valid now. And we've made some monitoring of the implementation as well. So next, I will be sharing our initiatives to address climate change issues. For actions that I have mentioned earlier related to climate change that require further studies, our department has submitted funding application for RMK12. So fingers crossed, we'll be able to get the funds for next year. So, but the major bulk of our work in EPD, when it comes to environmental education, or we call it EE in short, is on this environmental education and awareness. So the first one is Serasi. It's called Sekolah Rakan Alam Sekitar. Maybe some of you have heard of Serasi before. This is a program that was launched quite a while ago, 2003. And it encourages continuous environmental protection actions. And it also supports and strengthens EE across the curriculum. And it covers, excuse me, it covers areas of management, awareness, beautification of school, greening, and so on. So,
Susan, sorry, Susan, to interrupt.
Yeah.
Can you check if your speaker on your computer is max? Because apparently a lot of people are not hearing you.
Oh, okay. Can I go out and check first? I'm not so sure. Why is it not working?
Check the volume on your computer, whether it's max.
Is it better, Dr. Bala?
For me, it's okay. For me, it's okay. I'm not sure about the others.
Can you ask the others, please?
Okay. Is okay. I think it's getting better. So, okay. Are you still on your first slide? Have you moved? Because we are still seeing your first slide.
I have moved to this. Can you see this?
No, you're still on the first slide.
Oh,
okay. So what do you have to do? Can you stop sharing and go and share again?
Sure.
Okay, try again.
Okay.
And if you're using a mouthpiece, maybe it should be closer to your mouth.
Okay. Can you see this now?
Yes.
Is it the action plans requiring further studies? Is that the one? Can you see
yes,
that?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Can I just continue now? Is
it
okay
please.
for everyone? Okay. So Serasi, I was saying earlier, it incorporates the elements of climate change action such as energy efficiency and also waste management. And a few years ago, some of the schools, actually Serasi schools, have conducted their own monitoring, and they have practiced energy efficiency practices at school, and they have monitored the bills, and the bills have, the bills have reduced in cost. So that's one of the things that we are encouraging in schools. So the next one is about community EE and programs. So for the last few years, EPD has been focusing on working with communities, identifying champions, and also conducting surveys to gauge their perceptions about environmental issues affecting the community. And of course, we also highlight the issues of climate change. And we co-construct programs with them and implement the programs with the champions alongside the community members. The next one is on this climate change and energy efficiency awareness program for schools. This is an MOU we've signed with SESB last year, and we have covered 9 secondary schools in Sabah. And another one is a capacity building focusing on climate change actions together with Conference of Earth Environment from Akita, Japan. It's not just EPD.
Dr. Susan, I think your slides are still not moving.
Oh, okay. This is.
Is it possible for you to go on the slideshow mode?
Yeah, it is on the slideshow mode. Can you see that now? The climate change, energy?
Yes, now your slides have moved.
Oh, okay. Then maybe I have to do it manually. I'm sorry
Yeah.
about that.
Okay, no problem. Okay, go ahead.
So this capacity building for climate change actions, it's not only for EPD staff. We also invite members from the Sabah Environmental Education Network scene. And another collaboration we've had with other agencies is with WWF Malaysia on a climate change study program in Mabul Island to come up with a local early action plan. It's about climate change adaptations in the island. Can you all see the key challenges page now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. The first challenge that I think that would impact our society the next 2 decades is inconvenience. Society wants convenience and comfort. We want comfort, right? When it's really hot, what do? We switch on the AC, and we know that the recommended temperature is 24 degrees, but usually we would go down to 16. And we also want ability to travel fast and so on. And taking climate action is not always convenient and easy. Maybe we can ponder on this one. And it requires changes in our lifestyle at a personal level. So we usually say, oh, the government this, the NGO that, the private sector this. But it has to start with ourselves. And it also requires political will at the policy level. In environmental education, giving awareness is very much doable. But the challenge is when trying to translate the awareness into actions. That's one of our challenges. Perhaps, maybe, experience from COVID-19 or even, emerging pandemics, touch wood for that, might trigger or even force us to make changes with regards to climate change. Just to quote what the UN Secretary General and Antonio Guterres said recently in his Earth Day speech, greenhouse gases, just like viruses, do not respect national boundaries. So the next one is about funding. Would investment in education and climate adaptation be a top priority? Mr. Antonio also proposed 6 climate-related actions to shape the recovery and the work ahead in his speech. He said, public funds should be used to invest the future, not the past, and flow to sustainable sectors and projects that help the environment and the climate. I would like to think that one of education and climate adaptation would be one of the top priorities for our country. And the third one is about coping ability and mechanism of impacted communities. I think Efendi mentioned about people who are vulnerable earlier. So people already living in poverty might have greater pressure and difficulties coping with changes due to limited financial resources to relocate, even their spending power. And sensitive groups such as elderly and children too, young children, have higher risks when exposed to extreme weather. And indigenous people, they have to cope with higher level of health risks, even lack of clean water due to extreme natural disasters. The next one is green economy. Green economy is one of the options to be more sustainable, but might not be a popular option as profit is not maximized. If you were at the web forum last Friday, Dr. Daryl really emphasized on green economy as well. So our country's socio-economic development is still very much dependent on the use of natural resources, and as with other developing countries. So I will be sharing more of my thoughts later on, but for now, I leave you with my pantun suka-suka. Can you all see this?
Yes.
We have a long way to go. We acknowledge it's not easy, but we have to give it a go. Kalau bukan kita, siapa lagi? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Susan, for your sharing. I have a question for you before I move on. Since your expertise is on environmental education and raising awareness, there were a couple of questions earlier in the chat function asking, are we doing enough in terms of education and awareness? Or should we do more? Or we have done enough? Or what are your views?
Okay, I think we have done the initial works to prepare our society, at least through education and awareness, and also through the works of many scientists around the world. Yeah, and it's being communicated through internet and social media. So, but I don't think we have done enough at this stage. One of the things that perhaps we can do is to diversify our educational tools in terms of apps or in printed, to reach out to as many people as possible. However, limited infrastructure might impede this outreach to, especially to the rural communities. I was reading a news online yesterday in Borneo Post Online that even online teaching is really tough, to reach out to students or parents. So that's one of the challenges that we have to address. And another one is bringing technology to poor families. And one of the challenges of EE is to reach out to those already affected by the impacts of climate change. So I guess for this, adaptation measures are required to relieve them from the situation.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay, thank you, Susan. I'm moving to the third speaker, but for the first and second speaker, Fendi and Dr. Susan, can you just mull over this? There are two questions which I probably like you to answer after the third speaker. There's a question by Dato' Nohisham about how are we measuring urban heat island effects? And there's another question by Prof. Zelina. Could you comment on Sabah's carbon credit trading scheme status or success? So maybe you can ponder over these questions while I invite Puan Nurliza to speak. Okay, for our third speaker is Puan Nurliza Hashim, who is one of the most experienced town planners in the countries. And Puan Nurliza, perhaps you can share a little bit about the work you're doing now, and then go ahead and share your views on what do you think are the key challenges as far as climate change is concerned over the next 2 decades. Puan Nurliza?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Bala. Assalamualaikum and very good morning to everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. As Dr. Susan is saying, this lockdown, we are counting the days and we hope we get through this well. I don't have a slide like my two previous speakers, so I'm just going to go through some of the thoughts that I have on this subject that we are discussing today. And of course, very close to what I do, almost on a daily basis, is to try to address, this agenda, the sustainable agenda, especially in our very fast, rapid world that we are facing today. And I think this is something that is very complex. Climate change itself is a very complex system. And I think we also have to acknowledge that development is also a very complex system on its own. And they both climate change and development are very interrelated. And this is something that I think we need to address, the complexity of these two complex systems very carefully. And by the end of the day, development is meant to be positive. And I think that's something that we have to bear in mind, because development are meant for the human society. And that's where development also includes not only the economic development, which is improving our living standards, our income, our consumption, our employment, our wealth distribution, or even poverty reduction, and also environmental protection. But it also takes into account of human and social development. And I think this is where our capabilities, our access to health, education, our rights, our freedom, and also the rights of everyone, including marginalized groups, gender equality, security. These are things that are equally just as important as we speak about development. So I think this is where tackling climate change and achieving development at the same time is a challenge that not only we are facing as a country, but all over the world. Everyone is concerned about this issue. But I don't think it is impossible to address them, and especially when we are always thinking about sustainability at the end of our goal is how we achieve a sustainable development. And this is where the three factors of environment, economic, and social sustainability is something that has to have a balance or a focus at all times as we go through the development growth trajectory. For Malaysia, we know very well that we are almost an urban nation. I normally refer it to, because of more than 78% of our people living in urban areas today, or in any form of towns or cities all over both Peninsula and Sabah and Sarawak. And this is where I think the threat of what growth has brought upon us and how it has impacted us through climate change is something that I think we need to address collectively. Yeah? So the question Dr. Bala posed is 2 decades from now. Well, I'm always wishful to think that 2 decades from now we would we would be better off than what we are today, because I mean, climate change is actually very difficult because it's something that people cannot see, and people can only experience its impact over a certain time. So what we do today, or what we've done 2 decades or 5 decades ago, is what we are experiencing today, and maybe also in the future. And of course, we have, as a nation, been mindful of this situation as we speak. I think it's an agenda that we have had for years, since before we even commit to any form of carbon reduction policy. We already have a national environmental policy. But the demand for urbanization itself, as we keep on growing and developing, is actually the key source of the problem itself, because urbanization demand the use of resources, the use to fulfill our own lifestyle, how we consume our food, water, energy, how we move around, and even how the kind of waste that we produce daily. So urbanization itself is a very tricky situation to manage and handle, and it involves, all of us actually, and not only governments are responsible, but all of us are just as equally responsible to how we adopt or adapt to this urbanization growth over time. So 2 decades from now, I'm hoping that our own urbanization pattern would be more adopting of what is much more sustainable over time. But this is where what we've done over the past decades is definitely something that is what we are feeling as an issue today. The land use changes. Which where has always been defined as, when you want development, you have to have a land use change, and the income gaps that are because of faster growth it has also led to disparity in terms of income gaps. Not only within urban to rural, has always been a phenomenon between urban to rural, but today it's also a phenomenon within urban areas itself, where we have income gaps in urban areas, urban poor, people with just one meal a day in cities. And of course, I think most important is our health itself. These have affected us a lot, and not only talking about environment, but the urban lifestyle itself has also affected us in terms of stress and all kinds of problems that stress brings upon the human body. So I think we hope that 2 decades from now, if we go as business as usual, things will go on. And of course, these issues will be, you can't stop the problem. You can't even, it will just go on, and the repercussions will be even much more in terms of the threats that we have heard from the first speaker just now. So I believe that if we were to have a better future, we need to have a redefinition on what development is all about. I don't think we can stop development and growth. It's very much needed for the sustenance of human life. But how we redefine development tomorrow and 2 decades from now, if we were to have better impacts, we need to have a different form of way on how we even develop physically, socially, as well as environmentally. And physically, it also means that we need to relook at how local consumption and production needs to be addressed, and local jobs needs to be produced at the same time. We should not be talking just about new greenfield development. We should be talking about regeneration, redevelopment. Spaces should be retrofitted, reused, and shared. The concept of sharing should not just be, should also be not only in terms of space, but also should be addressed in terms of how our economy should be. How do we have a more shared economy? And I think this is where we can see that probably in the future, when we talk about all these elements in terms of growth and development, what we think as a balance that can happen over a large area has to happen even at a more small scale area. Even now, the introduction of urban agriculture in cities, and urban biodiversity and ecology has to be created. I mean, people want it to be protected, but we've lost so much that I think it's time we regenerate, we recreate all these spaces. So I think that's what I think in the future. If we don't do something, definitely the repercussions are even worse. The gaps get bigger, the threats get larger. But we do need to have a redefinition in terms of how to move forward today in order for 2 decades from now, we would have better impacts. I'm not sure whether it will have positive impact on climate because it's very difficult to change. But at least we are helping to regenerate our own local environment. So I think that's for now, Dr. Bala.
Thank you, Puan Nurhaliza. You have done a lot of work on climate resilient cities, right? So maybe you want to share examples of which cities in Malaysia do you think are doing well in this respect, where planning is a lot more progressive and taking into account of the need to be resilient towards climate change. Any examples?
Yeah, I mean, ever since we have been, we commit to the 40% reduction in 2009 and subsequently in 2015, I think Malaysian cities, we have launched what we call the low carbon cities. So I was very much a part of that work track, developing the low carbon cities framework. So what we see as positive is that, it has been a very slow process, I would say, but we have about 13 local governments and cities that have so far adopted or prepared their low carbon blueprint. And this includes cities, main cities like Kuala Lumpur, Putrajaya, and Petaling Jaya, Shah Alam, many other cities, Seberang Perai, that have actually prepared their low carbon cities. And in fact, not only besides these 13 cities that have prepared, there are many actually other cities that have participated in all kinds of programs which are related to some form of an environment improvement or low carbon adoption of programs. But I would say that a lot of these cities, if you were to ask me which has progressed more than others, I really can't say. I think, of course, Putrajaya, you can see results. Because I think when you talk about whether or not they are positive to what they have adopted, you will want to see whether whatever program that they have set to do have been very well measured. And this is where I think a lot of cities in Malaysia are struggling to actually measure where they are. Of course, we have a lot of cities that are committed, like Shah Alam, PJ, and I would say they are still very much within the Klang Valley cities that are more advanced in terms of having some form of plan, measuring them, and having a high level of stakeholders involvement in this program.
Okay, thank you, Puan Nurhaliza. We are going to take a few questions from the participants. We are going to call upon three of them who have been very actively asking questions. Maybe first, Datuk Noor Hisham, you can ask first, followed by Prof. Zelina, and then is that Mr. Miss Ting Yong? Datuk Noor Hisham, you want to have a go first?
Well, the question I'd like to ask Puan Nurhaliza is, I've been thinking about the way we've been planning our cities, and sometimes we name certain areas as industrial zones and some as residential zones. And then when you think about industrial areas where all these industries are discharging stuff into the drains, and then eventually those lead to the water, and we can't seem to cope with the amount of what you call effluents that are coming out. Now, is that right? When you put all planning into that, into what one area as residential, one area as industrial, maybe we should just spread them all around with no clear what you call zones. That's just a thought that I have in my mind. Can you comment on that?
Technically speaking, that's actually how our city should be. It should be more mixed use. If you look at our old cities, traditional cities, most of our older cities are very much mixed use in nature. You have a lot of these activities, within one space. That's what we mean by mixed in nature. So over time, we have gone into single-use zoning, and we've sort of spread them out. When it comes to environment, I think having mixed use, especially when we talk about mobility, logistics involved in industrial and urban activity, definitely having them mix create more mobility, and air pollution is affected in some ways. But when it comes to how industrial activities have actually developed, I guess I have two different thoughts on that. On one hand, it will be good for the smaller industries to be quite mixed. But at the same time, industries in Malaysia are particularly very difficult to manage if you were to mix them with housing and commercial development. And this is where I think that, if you want to regulate, especially within the current purview of the institutions that we have in terms of who manage what. It seems easier if industrial estates are put together in one place, because currently under the guidelines that we have for industries, it's the most regulated of all land use activities lah, compared to residential and commercial activities, you know. So if you want to talk about discharge, it seems much easier where it is together. But if you talk about from other aspects of what such land use does in terms of movement, sharing of resources for their production, of course, it's much better if they are together in a mixed use situation. But that would mean how we function as a city needs to change a lot. City council, city authorities probably need to really be able to enforce more than they can today. And I think this is something that is worth a lot of discussion, because definitely mixed use gives other benefits. So if we could manage the industrial activity together in a city and relook at all the jurisdictions that we have between authorities, definitely it is worth a discussion to how we undo this kind of single land use planning.
Thank you, Nurliza. Can I call upon Prof. Zelina? Prof, are you around?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Prof, carry on.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Dr. Susan about Sabah has some, I think, carbon credits scheme. So I was wondering, what is the success of that, and is it like financially worthwhile that it can be a model for other states?
Hi, thank you for the question. As far as I know, yeah, there was a program on carbon trading under the Sabah Forestry Department. That was, I think, in 2013. It was there was an amendment to their forestry enactment to enable them to collect revenue for carbon sequestration. But the status now, I do apologize, I do not know the status at this stage, but I can actually find out for you from my friends in SFD. Is that okay?
Fine, yes, fine, thank you.
Thank you. I leave my email so we can communicate later.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Okay. I think, Prof, I think maybe you were referring to what was the Malua Biobank many years ago that set out to do carbon trading for Sabah. So from what I know, the scheme never really took off, but Susan might have more up-to-date answers. Okay, can I call upon Mr. or Miss Ng from University of Nottingham? You had a number of questions.
It's Mr.
Okay, Mr. Ng Teck Yong, go ahead.
So I'll just read out the question from my chat.
You had a number of questions. Maybe you want to pick one and ask.
One. Okay. So I have a question. So it's like recently I read an article about the expansion of the Sahara Desert and shrinking of frozen land of the Arctic in order to adapt to climate change and combat climate change. So my question is, what is the opinion about this for the three speakers? What is the opinion? So is it like too ambitious, or is it that it can work, but it need to take a long time to work?
Okay.
Mr. Can you explain more on what are the adaptations? Because I have not read the article. I'm sorry about that. If you can share the adaptations, then maybe we can have a better view or an idea.
Do you want the link for the article, or?
No. Maybe you can just explain again. You said about expansion of the Sahara Desert and shrinking of the Arctic. Is that your?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe Fendi might be able to answer this. Fendi?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep. Yes, Fendi, go ahead.
I'm a bit confused on the question because from what I heard, the expansion of the Sahara Desert and also the reduction in frozen land is because of effects of climate change itself. It is nothing to do with adaptation strategies. It's actually the sign of a tipping point of our global warming right now, that we are reaching above one. I think the warming right now have increased by 1.1 Celsius of temperature, global temperature. So that's actually one of the key signs that the landscape and hotspots of climate zone around the world is rapidly changing. So I can't really see what's the adaptation action in what you're saying. So yeah, if you can send me a link or where you read it, maybe I can look in depth further.
Okay, thank you, Fendi. Maybe Mr. Ng, if you have a link or something, you can put it in the chat session and Fendi can look at it. So while waiting for that, I have a question for all three speakers, as well as if somebody in the audience wants to answer. The current COVID pandemic has highlighted the need for better disaster planning. And of course, when I say disaster, I'm not only talking about pandemics, but floods, droughts, all sort of disasters, which is of course crucial in the context of adaptation to climate change. So the question is, in terms of disaster planning, are we doing enough? What more do we have to do so that we are better prepared for future disasters? So any three of you want to answer, or somebody in the audience can also try to answer. Okay, maybe we start with Fendi first, and then maybe Noliza, and then Susan.
Yeah, maybe I can try to share my opinion on this. I think the issue with disaster planning in Malaysia is we really need to take to address the whole cycle of disaster risk reduction in accordance with the Sendai framework. This include looking at preparation, response, and recovery. But the main issue right now, our disaster management is response with solely focused on the response and relief. Of course, the government have increased effort based disaster risk management with collaboration with NGO in pre-disaster and post-disaster. But of course, this kind of initiative needs to be enhanced further, because right now they're only be tackling few areas, and some NGOs such as Mercy also facing issue in terms of funding, securing funding. But in terms of this disaster, when we're talking about climate adaptation, I think worthwhile highlighting that we can't just look at how to prepare communities for single event or single shocks such as disaster, flood. Because adaptation in climate change also talks about coping with incremental changes in the climate, such as temperature increase. So definitely we need to increase community resilience and especially self-reliance in how they live. Definitely we need to explore a way of how cities or settlements can be self-sufficiency, let's say in terms of food security. How can they produce their own food locally without relying on the global food system? We also need to look into maybe new ways of generating energy, such as looking at microgrid community using solar panels, where the community itself is very self-sufficient in terms of energy without relying on national grid. Because as you can see in the future, imagine we're talking about decades from now, extreme weather event or sea level rise could potentially inundate our transmission lines as our power stations. So communities in Australia and Europe already looking into this. So already looking into how can us community themselves be self-sufficient in energy supply. That's also very green in terms of contributing to climate mitigation. They're using solar panels and so forth. So yeah. So that's roughly what I think is going for.
Thank you, Fendi. For Noliza, you want to add on to this about how we better plan for disasters?
Yeah, I think a lot of I mean, that was a big thing in our 11 Malaysia plan. But a lot of the focus are also on the larger kind of disasters that we as a nation, we predict that's going to happen. I think a lot of the disasters that's also happening almost on a yearly basis, on a more regular basis, are disasters that are happening even in urban areas, And I think these are things that probably when we talk about risk management, disaster risk management, we probably need to include how cities can also respond to such kind of situation. And I think there's when it comes to disaster risk management, you need a big mechanism to overcome that. It's not just one council where we have currently, but how do we actually empower that even as to the local government, which is most of the time when we talk about disasters happening in local areas, it is actually the local government that are very much involved in addressing the needs of the communities. And probably not all of them are well prepared for such kind of managing risk management in their areas. So that's where I think that even in the COVID-19 itself, you can see that we were not very well prepared even at the city level. But I think we work very well. That's the thing about Malaysia, on how we can put our efforts together. But to be more prepared is to actually have some form of plan at a city level as well, not just at a national or a statewide level, but we need to have some form of disaster risk management, how our communities are more prepared for any form of eventualities that could happen at any time, because this is where people are living, they are congregating, that's where the numbers are actually. So any issue that happens, actually it will trigger most and affect most the people living in the urban population.
Thank you, Condoleezza. Dr. Susan, you can respond to that about how do you do better disaster planning. But before you start, Dato' Kezrul had a question. So Dato', I'm going to ask you to speak up after Dr. Susan is done. Yep. Okay, Dr. Susan, go ahead.
Okay. What is our way forward in this adaptation in terms of better disaster management or planning? For me, the sustainable, can you hear me, Dr. Bala?
Yes.
Okay. For me, the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, can be used as a guide to craft our way forward. And there's one thing that we need to revisit, the National Policy on Climate Change that was published in 2010. I think it's high time to revisit that and see which actions that are still much relevant after post-MCO, to which ones we can actually realistic enough for us to implement. And we should also get the relevant stakeholders and the right representatives to speak the same language and come up with realistic solutions. And from the education point of view, interventions need to be relevant to people, bound by local context, and actions to be realistic and can be addressed by individuals as well as groups. Yeah. And when we talk about EE tools, they have to be able to touch people's heart and nudge them to take actions as an individual or collectively. Yeah, that's all, Dr. Bala.
Okay, thank you, Susan. On your point about the revisiting the national policy on climate change, if you're familiar with that policy it was formulated many years ago, and it was very heavy on mitigation and not so strong on adaptation. I believe the ministry is now in the process of developing the national adaptation plan, which is important. So, but it has not started yet.
Okay,
so,
thanks, Dr. Bala.
Okay, now we're going to get Dato' Kezrul to speak. Dato', carry on.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bala, and thank you also for organizing this forum. What I put in the comments is that I've always been advocating for a control at source solution. That means if we want to solve a problem, we need to understand what is causing the problem, and then take measures to eliminate or to reduce these causes. And I gave as an example COVID-19. We know the cause of it is the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Presently, we cannot eliminate it. We have no cure yet. We cannot reduce it. There is no vaccine yet. So what we are doing really in the MCO is to keep the number of cases to within our capability of our health services. Now, on climate change, I see a lot of debate on more or less on the peripheral rather than looking at the source. My understanding of climate change is it's a result of global warming. And global warming is a result of the greenhouse effect. And the greenhouse effect is a result of an increase in carbon emission in our atmosphere. And this is coming from methane, from agriculture, and also CO2 from burning of fossil fuel. So the Paris Accord actually attempts to try to reduce carbon emission to pre-2000 levels. So my question would be, for Malaysia, do we have data on what our emissions have been over the last 30 years or so? Do we know what our commitments are under the Paris Accord? Do we know how much we need to reduce? If we have that, then we should get each sector, the industrial sector, the transportation sector, agriculture, even the urban sector, and get them to drop a plan where they have quantifiable targets. Because if we don't have targets, we will not get results. So for, say, for Sabah, and maybe also for our urban areas, do we have this?
Who wants to add? Efendi, do you want to give it a shot?
Maybe I can highlight, give some highlights on that. I agree with you that we should control at source, and that's actually is the negotiation of climate agreement for the past decades. That is all about reducing our carbon emission. But right now, as I showed earlier, that even though we're supposed to limit our warming to below 2 Celsius by 2050, but we are not nowhere near that. Emissions still coming up. Countries are simply not ambitious enough, and that's the big issue we have now. Most of it, you're right that methane is one of the biggest source because of our consumption of red meat and beef production. But also, actually, in Malaysia, 80% of our emission comes from the energy sector because our reliance on fossil fuel and private vehicles. And just now I saw some comment that information on Malaysia commitments in Paris Agreement carbon reduction is available in the Third National Communication Report and Banyak Update. Yes, it's true, it's available there. But so far, the issue is right now, we aim to reduce 45% carbon intensity by 2045 compared to 2005 level. That's meaning that our emission is not, calculation is not based on total emission, but it's also based on per GDP. But of course, as a developing country, we be given that privilege to use that. But the issue right now is that even though we are on the way to meet the target, we have reduced about 33% based on the latest report. We can say that we emit about 317 million tons of CO2 per year, but about 280 million tons of them is actually absorbed by our forests as carbon sink. So our forests absorb 84% of our own emission. That's play a very big role. So just now you talk about, do we have targets, specific targets for energy sector or even transportation sector, urban sector? Unfortunately, we don't have the targets. Right now, last year we have targets in terms of how much renewable energy share that we're supposed to have, is to have 35% target in the energy mix by 2025. But that's on the climate mitigation part. In terms of climate adaptation, my opinion is that there's no such thing as control at source, because the definition of climate adaptation itself is actually how it's a process. It's actually a process. There's no end game here. It's how we adjust to expected climate in the future and its effects, and how can we take benefit from it. So there is no end game to it, because in the future where we have more heat wave, annual floods, random sort of very random climates, we need to start thinking about how do we adapt to them. There is no control at source here, because the control at source can only happen if we mitigate our carbon emission. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Okay. Thank you, Fendi, Dato' Kezrol, and everyone. If you look at the chat session, Evelyn has been kind enough to share the link to the Third National Communication and the Second Biennial Report. I've gone through that document. There's plenty of data there. That's something for everyone to have a look if you have not seen it yet. Okay.
Can I say something, Dr. Bala?
Yes, Lisa, go ahead.
I think we also need to see, because Dato' Kezro mentioned about source, kan? And the most of the CO2 emission is actually coming from our own urban activities. And that's actually why we really need to address the emission at the city level. And unfortunately, as of today, I don't think a lot of cities are really measuring these emission levels. Yeah? So even though we have started the initiative for cities to measure from the low carbon cities framework, but I think getting data, getting the information at the local level is very, very difficult for them. And this has led them to, even till today, we're still finding that even those cities who have started to initiate it, they are not able to actually get the correct information. And this is why I think measuring is still core. Even if we want to reduce emission, we need to know where we are. And this is where I think whatever numbers we have, whatever that reports give, is very much at a national level. So how we can bring it down, aggregate it to the local level is actually very, very important, because that's the source of the real emission.
We completely agree with you. That's why we are now moving to the next question about institutional arrangement and governance. If you following the chat, some of the questions that have been raised is sometimes policy work well or seem to work very well at the federal level or national level, but it breaks down when it comes to the state or local level. And so with that, my next question to all the panelists and also the audience is, what are the changes that we have to make to the existing institutional arrangement and governance system to ensure more effective adaptation to climate change? Because adaptation is a multidisciplinary matter and currently comes under the jurisdiction of many, many ministries. If you talk about water, agriculture, disaster planning, cities, they all come under different ministries. So what are the changes or that we should make, or you think the current system is fine? So maybe who do you want to go first?
Dr. Bala, can I just respond to a few questions earlier about, I think Casey asked them about research on behavioral change and empowering locals. Is that okay if I just respond a few minutes?
Okay, quick response.
Yeah, just a quick one. Casey, you were asking about behavioral change, any research on that. One of the biggest hurdle in EE, one of the challenges is to do a study on behavioral change at a larger scale. So we have done some sort of like mini awareness, like perception, the perceptions of our target groups. So usually before a program starts, we will have some sort of questionnaire about their awareness level. And after that, we ask them. So usually, generally, they said their knowledge is higher after, but that's just knowledge or awareness. Behavior is something that it's quite a challenge to
Okay, thank you, Dr. Susan, for that quick response. So we now back to the issue of institutional arrangement and governance. Is the current system adequate? What are the changes that we have to do given that adaptation is multidisciplinary? Can we start with Efendi, move on to Puan Nurliza, and then Dr. Susan? And after the three speakers are done, I'd like to call upon Evelyn Pei and also Lee Shan Lee from NPPJ to pose their questions. Okay, Efendi, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So the question is how can we improve our governance and also our institutional arrangement? The thing is can you hear me, right?
We can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. So at present, the adaptation efforts it appears to be fragmented because the elements of climate adaptation are sort of embedded sporadically across various plans that looks like mostly in silo. So definitely we need to sort of start mainstreaming climate adaptation in all economic sectors, and basically it's about mainstreaming risk and vulnerability. So definitely first, the good place to start is we should have a dedicated central agency, and I feel that the establishment of Malaysian Green Tech and Climate Change Center announced last year is a good start. So that center needs to be the connecting platform to start disseminating climate information, risk and vulnerability across all stakeholders and policymakers, so we can start incorporating how this vulnerability and risk in all our development planning. So this center should also be an area to facilitate collaborative process with industry players, enhancing partnerships, and also building human capital in climate change field, which is right now severely lacking. At the same time, I think we also urgently need the national adaptation plan, or rather the process to formulate the plan itself, because we seriously need to conduct a comprehensive medium and long-term climate adaptation planning. And like I said, how can they be integrated into national decision making in our own budget every year? So many other developing countries have already embarking and developing the plan. So Malaysia actually already started this process a while ago. So I'm looking forward to how the plan is going to be formulated. But we need to take into account is that the NAP needs to be reviewed every now and then, because climate risks and hazards changes every now and then. As I said, even though we are expecting warming by 2 degree or 3 degrees C by certain year, this could happen even faster depending on new projections by the IPCC and all that. So this plan will also need to be reviewed, and the stakeholders in all economic sectors need to really sit down to the process with NGOs, academics, and because adaptation itself is a process. It's not something that you can do once and then be done with it. So in most countries such as the UK and Europe, this process actually conducted once in 5 years. So I think the summary is that we need a coordinating center, which is the Malaysia Green Tech and Climate Change Center. And perhaps what I think maybe we should look into legislation as well, in terms of having a climate change act that make it mandatory for all development projects to start considering climate risk in the future. Because right now, even though we in ERE have been involved in quite a few development projects, we don't see, let's say we develop a railway or highway or even a building in one area, we didn't even know, we're talking about decades of planning here, what will sea level rise happen in the future? What is the flood area extent? Is this area going to be inundated? So to better make a sound investment decision, I think the data information that research needs to be communicated better across our policymakers and all stakeholders. Thank you.
Fendi, just to add on, what are your views about the federal and state links? And as you are aware, we have many challenges to translate national policy at the state level. So how do you think we can do it for climate adaptation?
That's just a really it's a long old issue lah, this federal and state jurisdiction thing. Basically the issue is that I think maybe I just highlight to the participants that state government relies so much of revenue from land, so we have more deforestation and all that. But I think we need to start looking at, of course, we need to allow state government to derive revenue from other streams, and better financial incentive and all that. But at the same time, I think the starting point is to remove all these flawed financial incentives, such as if you look at flood mitigation, the budget actually comes under the federal government every year. But the actions that contribute to flood, deforestation, and not having enough buffer zone, it actually comes from state government. So this kind of incentive needs to be removed, because as long as we have that, state government may not see that okay, it's fine as long as I clear more land or whatever, someone's going to take the burden away from me in terms of budget. I don't want to live any sense. So yeah, in terms of climate adaptation, I think the how we have how we manage our natural resources in terms of state government jurisdiction needs to be changed. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on that.
Thank you very much, Fendi. Can I call upon Noliza to talk about the institutional arrangement and governance?
Yeah, I think a lot has been said by Fendi, but and totally agree with most of the points. I think definitely in order for us to make this happen, this big change happen, governance is one. But even before we talk of governance, there need to be a streamlining of all the policies and regulations that we have currently with regards to any form of related to climate change agenda. I think, and this will mean that, you know, it will go across all sectors that are the source of emission. So, and that will mean a lot actually, you know. So this is something that I'm not sure how this can be done, but you know, looking at the amount of policies that we have in the country, and whether or not these policies are one, whether it is detailed enough or refined enough that it could be easily translated at the ground level. Second, whether it is in conflict with some of the other policies that we have that might be also going towards emission rather than reduction. And of course, third is ensuring that as much as possible, how do we have policies and regulations that will have a strong buy-in, you know, at all levels, and that includes what you raised just now at the state level, because anything that needs change at the local level for Malaysia needs to be first adopted and approved and agreed by the state level. So this is where aligning is very, very important to be done. And in some countries, you find that, you know, like in Australia, when they came up with their sustainable blueprint, they align all their policies. And in some countries, they even have policy integration ministries, you know. So I'm not sure whether having one organization to manage this big agenda is possible, because we have in the past have so many formed many kinds of agencies, you know, and it will depend on where these agencies are parked under, and therefore their focus and skew of how they overcome issues will be very much related to the ministry that they are answerable to. So even though we have a Malaysian Green Tech that was a former organization and now it's being rebranded as Green Tech and Climate Change Center, what's important is actually the role of this agency itself, you know, how, what kind of powers do they have, what kind of, institution in terms of their setup, are they able to actually work with cross-cutting all kinds of agencies horizontally? Because what is missing in Malaysia now is the horizontal integration. You know? Of course, the vertical is just as challenging, but I think if we can overcome the horizontal integration, we can align a lot of the work that we have done in the past. We can learn from a lot of the mistakes that we have done also from our own policies and actions, and we can undo that through better practices or better policies that integrates all these issues. So that is something that needs to be done, and of course the question will be who is to coordinate all that action, because at the end of the day it's all about no matter how a good document that you prepare, the institutional framework and the implementation mechanism needs to be in place, and this needs to be in place for me at all levels, national, state, as well as at the local level. I really am worried that, you know, of course it'd be good if we could have some form of a national council, but this is where we have seen that when you put a lot of weight on the National Council, it also sometimes very difficult to operate, because they are very busy. Sometimes meetings cannot happen, you know. Some action councils only meet once a year. So you cannot be too dependent on a council, and most often that's what we will always put as a framework, you know? So, of course, in Malaysia's situation, that's the only way where you can make all the ministries maybe work together. And in this case, we are talking about lots of ministries, you know, housing and local government, even the environment department, you know, natural resource, our EPUs, our transport, Ministry of Works, our finance ministries, and and so many more. And so this is where I think having that coordinated effort needs to be done. I don't know whether an agency is strong enough to actually manage that. Of course, the likable structure will be to have some form of council. But then again, how effective that will be, we have seen a lot of councils not able to meet is another issue. So, but not swaying away from the whole intention. And this is where at the local level, at the state level, this is something that we feel that, I think that we still need to institutionalize a strong governance structure at both the state level and also the local level, because we just cannot wait for the federal. Because a lot of decisions are made, as Fendi pointed out just now, with regards to conversion, land change, and all that at the state level. And this is where how can we have a more state kind of action council, I think is just as important. Then they will actually be working in hand with the local authorities, with all other state agencies. So it looks like, we require a very strong two-tier kind of governance structure if we want to address this. But I would also want to work, because of late I've been focusing a lot about how we can actually empower local government. And this is, I think, one level of governance that we could enhance further, strengthen their capability, capacity, in order for them to be able to manage the day-to-day issues, because the development plans are being approved almost on a daily basis. So if all the initiatives are understood, all the guidelines and regulations can be adopted and implemented at the local level, it's, that would be a faster way of overcoming a lot of the issues.
Thank you, Nurliza. I just have a quick question for you. When we talk about institutional arrangement and federal and state, everything, do you think for the next 2 years particularly, given the COVID crisis, all the attention will be on the COVID and reviving the economy, and not much attention will be put on climate change? Do you think that's going to happen?
Yeah, that's also the worry, that a lot of the effort will be on COVID. Not that COVID-19 is not related to what we are also talking about, because at the end of the day, it's always about public health, public safety. But yes, there is a possibility that our focus, our funds also, are now going towards the recovery against COVID. So I think this is why I also agree with Dr. Susan on having an overarching mind on what sustainability is all about. Even if we are just addressing, prioritizing on COVID, I think there's a lot of linkages that we can link with our efforts in overcoming COVID with other initiatives as well, while we're taking, because at the end of the day, it's public health, and public health is also related to a lot of the sustainable goals that we have, and hopefully it will also be addressing on how we consume, and how we also produce in our urban areas to sustain and overcome the pandemic at the local level. So I think if we are just looking at one issue per se, then the funds will be, we are wasting not only efforts, time, and money in just addressing one issue. But if we could relate that big agenda of overcoming COVID with all other issues that we have currently as a spin-off, I think then we could still be intact with our emission issue that we still have. But it's also an opportunity, Dr. Bala, because what we've seen is, the tremendous reduction of emission with the lockdown, tremendous environmental change with the lockdown. Of course, everyone say this is temporary, but what if we make this temporary situation the new normal? That would be very interesting on how we change our lifestyle, we change on the way we do things, and probably we could even overcome the climate change at the same time.
Okay, thank you. Susan, Dr. Susan, can you share your views about the institutional arrangement, maybe focusing on how Sabah is handling this?
Just a quick one, Dr. Bala, is also nearly 12. I think Fendi and Norliza have raised many valid concerns of what we share also here. And ideally having a centralized body to coordinate the adaptations, works of measures would be really good to have. But being realistic, how are we going to streamline all the so many policies that, or even works raised by Norliza earlier? And I think what we need is a strong collaboration. I know people say, oh, we've heard of that before, strong collaboration, but we need to have the right people in the right place, at the right place, to speak the same language and to focus on the threatening issues. So and also I was saying earlier about funds, top priority for funds, but I have also some reservations about maybe the funds will be put more on public sector, public health now, since we have all these pandemic issues. That's all, Dr. Bala.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. On the topic of governance, can I call upon Mr. Lee Shan Lee from MPPJ? You had a question earlier about the governance system. Mr. Lee, are you around?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Bala. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you, Dr. Bala, and also all the panelists. I think my question is about the existing governance system in facilitating the adaptation process. But I think the panelists, especially Norliza, have answered most of the question I have, and I think the answer is no at the moment, or maybe partially is the process, or making it how to improve the efficiency on the governance systems. So my question is, when you talk so much on the having the strong hand at the federal level, and also at the planning stage, we always forget about the execution at the local level, not even at the local government level, but at the community levels. So how to make this kind of vertical linkage from the top down instead of top down, but give more emphasis on the bottom up. And when I talk about bottom up, it's not that we ask the community to execute, to do the work as we told them, but we let them to execute and let them to apply the appropriate technology or method comfortable at the community level, and also listen to them and apply whatever that proven effective at the federal level. Instead of I look at most of the sectoral plan we have, we are talking about so much of the silo things, or even in the plan itself, we have the so-called integrations, multi-sectorless and all these things. But when it comes to the execution, it's very much still depend on the particular ministry or particular agencies, without looking at the at the integration, or try to synergize it at the local level. I think at the moment, many of these program we are talking about, if you want to see the effectiveness of the adaptations outcome, the most important part, the critical part, should be at the local, at the community level, because they are the ones who will take into consideration different multiple sectorless, different dimension of development into a singular project or programs. But so far we have seen is when you talk about the just now somebody mentioned about the measurement of the data. when a particular ministry try to measure data, he will focus or confine himself to the scope of his work, of his ministry or agency, or try to relate to the study scope. And even they come to the execution part also, in the fear of, encroaching into other people's skirt or encroaching into other people's power circle and so on. So I don't have the answer for that, but I need to get some view or opinion from the panelists. He said because we are so afraid of having a total institutional arrangement, or trying to transform or even reform our fiscal or taxation system, or even come to the amendment to the constitutions. That is my question, Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. I think that is a very complex question that's going to take us 2 days to answer. But I'm going to ask the speakers later when they are wrapping up their session to try to address what you have just mentioned. And I think it's the local action at the community level is very, very important. We have very little time left. I'm just going to ask Evelyn Tay to pose your question. If you can make it very quick. Evelyn is from the Third World Network. Go ahead, Evelyn. Evelyn, go ahead. Can you speak? Can you speak now? Okay. What we're going to do now is, while waiting for Evelyn to set up her microphone, we can't hear you, Evelyn. So I'm moving on to the three speakers because we are almost at 12 now. I'd like to invite all the three speakers to just maybe within 1 or 2 minutes only, just to summarize what you said and any last words if you have. Can we start with Efendi?
Yeah, so time is running out, so I'm just going to be quickly touch on I think the related to current pandemic. Because even though our emission and reduction reduced during the COVID-19, but this is actually not really an environment is getting cleaner, but this is not actually a sustainable development, because jobs are lost and economic is getting really hit badly. But I believe that, but another concern is that usually after every crisis, climate emission always spike up after that. This happened in the financial crisis about 10 years ago, where climate emission immediately spike up after that. So that's a worrying trend that will really affect our global climate agreements, and also how we gonna formulate the adaptation plan in the future. But I really believe that this ideal time to start looking at transformative changes. How can we? It's a wake up call, and how to build back better. So after this, the huge amount of money we spend on recovery should talk about delivering new jobs and businesses to more clean and green transition, and also money used to funding infrastructure needs now to really look at green infrastructure, and also infrastructure that is more resilient and able to cope with climate change impacts. So that's I think what it should be done after this. It's an opportunity for recovery, and we should not waste it by doing things the old way. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, Fendi. Puan Nurliza, you want to?
Yeah, okay. First and foremost, I think, I totally agree that when it comes to implementation and getting results, it's always better when, communities are brought in. So in fact, a lot of the work I do now in Urbanization is sort of shortcut the whole thing and just focus on the people itself. Because sometimes it's true, like Dr. Susan said, you can't really fix a lot on top in time. But it's still, as a nation, we still need to do that. We still need to get that in order. Also agree with Datuk Kezro that, we have senior ministers in security, infrastructure, economy, but we don't have anyone looking at environment and climate change. Yeah? So even for decades we've been talking on environment, but we're still not there, giving the right importance to it, even at the top, So I think whether you like it or not, we have to fix at the top, at the national level. That's important because it sort of gives the signal to the states as well as to the local. So it's something that needs to be done, and probably with the new government in place, it's a good opportunity to raise it with the new government. But we are losing time, and it's always important to get the actions on the ground activated. And this is where people action plans needs to be put in place. In some cities, they even create community handbooks, where communities are more in the know of what the situation is, how to overcome it, how they themselves can be that change agent to some of the emission issues that we have in cities. So I think the power of the people, the community is very important, and we must not lose sight of that. And I've always been advocating community planning action documents, prepared by the community themselves. And planners also taking a different role of just facilitating that process, and how plans which are more related to overcoming the issues on the ground becomes implementable. And that goes the same for the pandemic that we are overcoming. At the end of the day, no matter what big plans we are thinking of, even at the national level, but it's the city, the community, the resiliency of our people is very important. And I think there's we recently in Urbanese, we launched a community collaboration resilience platform. We wanted to actually reach out and also encourage Malaysians actually to think about how to become stronger at the end of the day, how to build better after this. We've not got much response from Malaysia. We saw a lot of efforts done other place, and this goes to also showing that probably we are not ready. Probably we need our people. They need more understanding on this issue so that they can become they can be the champions instead of just the government. Because if we can change that from the bottom up, I think we can do a lot more. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nurliza. And our last speaker, Dr. Susan, you want to wrap up within 2 minutes?
Okay, Dr. Bala. I would like to reiterate that climate change is everyone's business, and like what Nurliza has said, from top to the grassroots levels. And empowering local communities is definitely one of the meaningful approaches. And some works in Sabah have been done at the local level, like by PACHOS. We've started that with communities and a few other, like SFD as well. And I would like to leave you with this, a quick one, because we are always asking why there's so many campaigns, awareness campaigns, and why people aren't changing. It's time for us to understand there's a gap between attitude and behaviors. People know about it, but why don't they act upon it? This could be due to some barriers, perhaps lack of knowledge or emotional blocking to new knowledge, and maybe the existing values or even culture, and even some old habits. So that's all, Dr. Bala. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, everyone. We had a long session today, and we touched on multiple issues. I mean, climate change is, after all, a very complex topic. We touch on land use planning, we touch on ecosystems, we touch on local communities, we touch on education awareness, we touch on disaster planning, and we basically touch on everything under the sky. Unfortunately, we only have 2 hours, and I hope we managed to cover quite a bit. To the speakers, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we can't clap. If you clap, you can't hear. But thank you very much. And if you can just put your email address in the chat function, if any of the participants wants to contact you, they know how to get hold of you. And yeah, so you can just put your email address there. and the participant, I'm sure some of them would like to talk to you personally. With that, my personal parting words, I believe the government will embark on the national adaptation policy for climate change. We hope that is done in a participatory manner involving all levels of society. And as many of you rightfully pointed out, I think action and participation at the local level is very important. Otherwise, policies will just remain policies. With that, from me and my colleagues at ERE Consulting Group, thank you very much. Have a good day, everyone.